There's no one story right now that leads me to this point. There is a dominant story that has me concerned about World War III, and that is the potential for Ukraine to join NATO. Now, of course, NATO countries said, well, we don't know, maybe. Zelenskyy is furious over this, saying that they should be allowed in. One of the demands Vladimir Putin had before he invaded Ukraine was he wanted assurances that Ukraine would not join NATO. Instead, NATO, Western powers, started bringing in many more countries into the fold. Sweden, for instance. This has just pissed off Vladimir Putin, who's currently working with China. And boy, oh boy, does it really feel like we are heading towards World War III. Now, as much as the simple story may be that inducting Ukraine into NATO will kick off some big explosions, there's actually some bigger news which could lead to total chaos and something more substantial for you. And that is, my friends, the BRICS currency. Welcome to the future. BRICS gold-backed common currency, a shock to global fiat money system, says economist, as Russia confirms launch in August. BRICS dollars, backed by gold. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and perhaps containing a few other countries, including Saudi Arabia. They'll begin trading in a BRICS currency. The US dollar will fall. And when that happens, my friends, I hope you are prepared to own nothing and be as happy as you can possibly be. Because perhaps the big reason why these Western leaders have been trying so hard to make you own nothing and be happy is not because of climate change. It's not because they want you to eat bugs, but because they know there is nothing they can do to stop it. They have failed so utterly. The hope now is that when the BRICS currency takes over and the U.S. loses its only reason for wealth, military might and the forced petrodollar, your standard of living is going to drop so rapidly and dramatically, you're going to feel it. You'll own nothing. You won't be happy. But they're hoping if they convince you now, you will be. The real reason you're not living in a house, you're in a pod, is because you're environmentally conscious. You've taken it upon yourself to be a better person. Perhaps. Let's take a look at this story and figure out what's going on. MSN says the BRICS countries could soon launch a viable alternative to the US dollar, Russia confirmed this week. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, a coalition of nations known as BRICS, is set to introduce a new currency backed by gold, RT reported. An official announcement in this regard will be made at the bloc summit in Johannesburg, South Africa in August. With the growing initiative, more and more countries are lining up to join the group. Willem Middelkoop, a former journalist, tweeted that 41 countries have applied for BRICS memberships. Oh, man. There you go. It's official. BRICS planning to introduce new trading currency backed by gold at August summit. Gold standard will be a great benefit to strengthening single currency. 41 countries have applied for BRICS membership. That's right. The death of the petrodollar. Recently, I think it was the guy from BlackRock was encouraging people to buy Bitcoin. Maybe. I'm not going to tell you what to do or what not to do. I'm just going to tell you if this launches and 41 countries, that's a lot, including the BRICS nations and maybe even Saudi Arabia, if they start trading in a gold-backed currency supported by these nations, the U.S. is done. But do you think that U.S. forces, powers, Western powers, will simply lie back and accept this? No. Which is why I think World War III is a real possibility. It's not just about joining NATO or something like that. It's not just some border dispute and people are fighting. It is the true and real threat to the livelihoods of people in power. They do not want to give up that power, and they won't. Even if it means World War III. Even if it means you lose everything. Now, there's interesting questions around the philosophy of war, what the true motivations are. Could it be that Western powers, seeing what China is expanding into and the power they're accruing, have decided we will not allow our world to be like communist China? Or is it something worse? Have our leaders been fractured with half subverted by the communist dream of being an authoritarian despot in control of everything, and the other half sticking true to the American vision, in which case Western powers are fractured and will likely soon collapse. Could it be the whims of tyrannical morons like the Biden family who just want to be rich and don't care how? And when they find out that the deals they cut are meaningless because those deals are in U.S. dollars and the U.S. dollar is going to be worthless soon, now they're angry. So what happens? Maybe then Biden sends cluster bombs to Ukraine. Let's talk about the escalation of hot conflict. Biden defends difficult decision to give Ukraine cluster bombs amid congressional pushback. It took me a while to be convinced to do it, the president said of the controversial decision, which he described as a temporary measure. Temporary, really. President Joe Biden defended what he called his very difficult decision to provide cluster munitions to Ukraine in an interview that aired Sunday, saying the war-torn country needed the controversial weapons to fight off invading Russian troops. It took me a while to be convinced to do it, but the main thing is they either have the weapons to stop the Russians now from there, keep them from stopping the Ukrainian offensive through these areas, or they don't. And I think they needed them. The administration's announcement Friday that it would be sending cluster munitions to Ukraine in a U.S. military aid package was met with pushback from some of Biden's fellow Democrats who noted the surface-to-surface warheads, which disperse small munitions or bombs over wide areas, can explode after battle and sometimes injure or kill innocent people. Yeah, civilians. The weapons have been banned in more than 100 countries, and the White House suggested last year that Russia's use of the weapons in Ukraine was a potential war crime. This is where we are. You know, people seem to think it can't get that bad. It'll never get that bad. It won't escalate. The U.S. was arguing Russia using these weapons could be a war crime. And now Biden is saying we will do the same. This is the escalation. There's no way past it. So I wonder, will it be Vladimir Putin firing a nuke? And the bigger question, I suppose, in the political space is, if war really does break out on a global scale, do you think there will be an election? Honest question. Or will they say we are invoking wartime emergency powers? I don't know. I feel like this country would fall apart in 2 seconds if there was no election. But changing a president mid-election, these are tough calls. Biden said the move was necessary now because the Ukrainian military is low on ammunition, emphasizing that it's a temporary measure. The Ukrainians are running out of ammunition. The ammunition that they used to call them 155 millimeter weapons. This is a war relating to munitions, and they're running out of that ammunition, and we're low on it. And so what I finally did, I took the recommendation of the Defense Department to not permanently, but to allow for their use in this transitional period. Who do you think's winning? Recently, there was a video from the State Department spokesperson, I believe it was State Department, who said that the war has been a disaster for Ukraine. Someone then responded, a journalist, don't you mean Russia? And he goes, oh, yes, right. The war has been a disaster for Ukraine. I needed 2 corrections moving on. And they went, oh, whoa. How did he say a disaster for Ukraine twice? Unless that's what he really meant. And the journalists sought to correct him. Isn't that, oh, I want to swear so bad, psychotic? Journalists listening to the words of a spokesperson saying this was bad for Ukraine. And they go, don't you really mean Russia? And he goes, oh, this was bad for Ukraine. And they go, oh, no, you mean Russia. And he goes, oh, whoopsie. It's just an insane reality that someone can come out and tell you a thing, and then you as the person who doesn't know tells them. I want to stress that point again. If the head of a bank came out and said, deposits are in trouble because we're low on funds, what position does a random person have to then go, you mean the funds are good? And then the manager goes, yes, the funds are good. What? You are here to listen to this man tell you what for, not for the journalist to report back to him what to say. Now, perhaps he misspoke, fine. But it just goes to show you how insane things are getting. I think the reality is the war is going bad for Ukraine. And we hear these lies and manipulations because it's all propaganda. They need to boost morale. They need Ukrainians fighting on the front lines. So they say, Russia's losing and Ukraine is winning. But I really don't know. I just know there's propaganda. If the reality is Joe Biden was so desperate, he's sending cluster munitions to Ukraine, despite the fact the U.S. said before the use was potentially a war crime, it shows you how truly desperate the U.S. has become in their support for Ukraine. This is the fascinating reality of war. War crimes, meaningless. The only thing that matters in war is winning. As the saying goes, all is fair in love and war, but I want you to consider this. Given the option to either lose the war or use banned munitions, what do you think a nation would do? So I've talked about Vladimir Putin using nuclear weapons if need be. And many people say, no, he would never do that. He'd be wiped off the planet. No, he wouldn't. If Vladimir Putin nukes Ukraine, ain't nobody going to sacrifice their European capital for Ukraine by firing back in retaliation at Russia. They may use nuclear weapons in Ukraine against Russian troops. That's possible. But take a look right now if you don't believe me. Don't believe me? You say, no, there's no way they'll use nukes. The United States argued against the use of cluster bombs. And now that Ukraine is running low on weapons and becoming desperate, the U.S. is saying, no, it's okay. We're allowed to do it. That's how it always goes. That's war. No one is going to sit back and say, I would save my own country if only it weren't a war crime. That's where we are. Joe Biden will gladly engage in war crimes if it means his agenda be fulfilled. In an interview with ABC's This Week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, said the weapons were crucial to his country's defense. We need it to win this war. While some Republicans have criticized Biden for sending the weapons, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul, Republican, said it was the right thing to do. Russia is dropping with impunity cluster bombs in Ukraine, the country of Ukraine, right now. All the Ukrainians and Zelensky are asking for is to give them the same weapons, blah, blah, blah. Give them the same weapons. What happens when Vladimir Putin drops a tactical nuke? What about nuclear artillery? Are we then going to provide those same weapons? Here we go, baby. Here we go. From the national interest, talk of NATO membership for Ukraine is a dangerous distraction. The debate over Ukrainian membership in the alliance sustains one of Russia's stated motivations for launching its war, undermines the cohesion of the alliance, and pulls attention away from other high-priority issues. Well, if Ukraine were to join NATO, World War III would have begun. In the lead-up, they write, to this week's NATO summit in Vilnius, there's been renewed debate about the strategic wisdom of offering Ukraine membership in NATO. Proponents of an accelerated path to membership rightly argue that Kiev deserves robust international support in its brave resistance to Russia's aggression. As such, they argue that Ukraine's efforts to defend its territory have earned it a place in NATO. I have had this debate with many people. They say that the U.S. has a treaty with Ukraine that should they give up their nuclear weapons, we will come to their defense if they're attacked. And so what did they do? They gave up their nuclear weapons. And now they've been attacked. So one might say, well, then it's justified. U.S. involvement must happen. In fact, according to that treaty, we should be doing more, right? Here's the reality. Treaties like this are always a bad idea because you don't know who the enemy of Ukraine will be aligned with. You don't. So can this treaty really be held up? Can one generation promise the children of another? No, they can't. Ron Paul said it. But many have argued, even still, if the U.S. does not uphold its treaties, what will that mean for all of the other treaties? They'd be worthless. Perhaps. But to make a treaty such as this is insane because you don't know who you will be up against. Russia fires a nuke on Ukraine. China joins the fray. And now the U.S. is forced to defend Ukraine based on this treaty. What a terrible proposal. But this is where we are. Former U.S. Congressman Tom Malinowski recently argued that Ukraine should just be granted membership in NATO without any further delay, despite admitting that such a course could easily lead to the alliance becoming an active belligerent in the war. I think it's fair to say they are, but sure, this is where we are. They're going to say these debates are a waste of time. There are a myriad of practical, political, and strategic reasons why Ukraine will not be admitted to NATO. Worse than mere self-delusion, however, this performative debate diverts attention from the real and urgent imperative of ending the conflict. Why can't they join? Ukraine doesn't have the votes and it won't get them. While current NATO members are mostly universally sympathetic to Ukraine's plight and fully supportive of its efforts, they will not unanimously support its ascension to NATO. Perhaps it's all that really matters. They're not going to be allowed in. Zelensky's pissed off. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on Tuesday denounced NATO negotiators for balking at offering Kiev a concrete path to joining NATO in a draft communique being hammered out at an alliance summit. The alliance leaders are gathering in the Lithuanian capital for a 2-day summit, and Ukraine's bid to join NATO is the most sensitive item on the agenda. In the latest draft summit communique, allies are now considering stating that we will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine when allies agree and conditions are met, according to a senior NATO diplomat and a person familiar with the talks who, like others, were granted anonymity to discuss internal negotiations. The language is not yet finalized, but the draft seen by Kiev on Tuesday enraged Ukraine's leader. I don't care. I have had people sit across from me and justify us being involved in this war in Ukraine. I don't care about the Ukrainian territory. I don't care about the Donbass. I don't care about Crimea. I care about avoiding World War III. I care about the people. I know people there. I feel bad. Russia should not be invading. Long and complicated history in the region. The Bidens shouldn't have been involved in Burisma. No question, no issue. You can make all the political arguments you want in the world. They should not have been involved. But here we are. And now someone like me. What do I want to do? I don't know. Tend to my chickens. Live life, just like all the rest of you, are now facing down the prospect of nuclear annihilation. Why? Because of the Donbass region? How does that make sense? It doesn't. Many people have likened this to World War II. Hitler's invasion of the Sudetenland, things like that. We are not Europe. We are not Ukraine. NATO has allies in strength, and Russia is not attacking a NATO nation. The idea that we would retroactively induct Ukraine into NATO is essentially a declaration of war on Russia. And then what will happen? Congress, who is supposed to declare war, won't. The U.S. will just say, we must uphold our treaties, and we're going to fund more bombs. What a psychotic reality. I am not so naive to think that there are not real fights and real challenges ahead. I am not so naive to think that we can simply ignore Russia and China. I totally get it. But if you're telling me that the solution to all of these problems is a potential World War III, then what's the point anyway? If we're going to wipe ourselves out in nuclear annihilation, then we're better off just letting Russia have all of Ukraine. Here's your options. Russia keeps the entirety of Ukraine, east to west, the whole thing. Or nukes are launched around the world and the planet is left in a smoldering pit of ash. I'm not saying it's absolute that these are the things that will happen. I believe that if Russia takes Ukraine, conflict will likely slow down. I believe that he likely will stop at the Donbass because of the active conflict. He probably would have taken the entirety of Ukraine were it not for U.S. intervention. So, of course, people are arguing that's a good thing. I don't care. I've been to Ukraine. It's a beautiful country with great people. But this is not we are not Ukraine. We do not give up our peace and safety and security because of some nation that is thousands of miles away. Many argued yes, but then Russia would be on the doorstep of NATO. NATO put us on the doorstep of Russia with Estonia and Latvia. You've got Kaliningrad up there. It was NATO that expanded into these territories to place NATO countries on the border of Russia. Why? Because if we didn't, Russia would invade them and then they'd be on our border. What's the difference? The U.S. decided we should encroach on territory up to Russia so that we'd be safer. All that did was incite Russia. So here we are. Yes, perhaps you will own nothing and you will be happy. But it won't be because of some ideological mission. It will be because the BRICS nations and the war will destroy the global economy and you'll have no option. Get ready to eat bugs. Why? Because when war comes, you ain't getting the grains. Soldiers, they march on full bellies. That's what they say. They say wars are fought on the bellies of soldiers. Do you think you will be eating anything other than bugs if we go to war? All of the food we produce will be shifted to the war effort. It's going to be an interesting time indeed. Now, the news about Ukraine joining NATO may just be nonsense. A lot of people are pointing it out as if it means NATO can actually induct Ukraine, or would actually induct Ukraine. I think the news we're getting is actually the subtle way for NATO to be like, we are not going to let you in. There's a great video by Vivek Ramaswamy. He's speaking at a town hall and he said he will end the war by giving concessions to Russia, by creating essentially what is similar to the North, to the Korean deal, an armistice and a barrier. And then he would demand of them they cease their military alliance with China. Bold offer. Maybe they'd take it. Maybe they won't. All that really matters is we are heading in this direction. And while we can talk and bicker about Bud Light or otherwise, this is the real news. But we'll see. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.